So like many others lately, I've been feeling very burned out on the Disney Marvel machine. I was never the most massive fan to begin with. I wasn't the kind to pore over Easter egg videos or analyse post-credit scenes through a microscope or anything. But like everybody else, I got very swept up in the build to Endgame, and outside of that, I enjoyed most of it enough that I always made a conscious effort to watch every single entry, and often on release day, because for the most part, it was almost always a fun night out at the movies at worst, and every now and then, they'd hit their best and make an out-and-out banger that I thought was legitimately excellent. I know it's become kind of the in thing right now to crap on this whole franchise, and some of the criticisms I do totally get. But even as someone who isn't wrapped up in the fandom of these things, I'll be the first to say that when the MCU is good, it is damn good. Black Panther, the first Guardians movie, the OG Iron Man, the double whammy of Infinity War and Endgame. Great movies and exciting event-style cinema that I had an absolute blast with, and have gone back to rewatch on multiple occasions to show friends and family. After Endgame though, well, that became a bit of a different story. The TV shows started to really demand too much of my time, and while I watched and really enjoyed WandaVision, most of the others I'd drop after a couple of episodes or still haven't even bothered starting. I started to skip films here and there, and the ones I did see didn't exactly light my world on fire. Some I even thought were just awful, with Thor: Love and Thunder taking the unfortunate mantle of being the first ever Taika Waititi movie that I didn't like. It really felt like the franchise was just treading water with nothing to do, nowhere to go, and making up for that by saturating the market with so many hours of content that the brand still went strong. And when you see graphs like this charting the huge uptick in specifically MCU output, and that's without even acknowledging the multitude of other superhero content out there further saturating the market, it's easy to see why so many people, myself included, are feeling the burnout. The whole last phase of these films has been a real meandering mixed bag, and with maybe the latest Spider-Man being the only exception, none of those movies, even including some of the better ones, have felt like a big deal, either in the grand scheme of this whole interwoven universe, as a big must-see cinema event, or even within the confines of their own narratives. I really like Shang-Chi, for example, like probably a hell of a lot more than most. But I wouldn't exactly call it essential viewing, if you get me. And then Phase 5 kicked off with Ant-Man Quantumania, and it's all just really felt so very unremarkable for a while now. And the reason I say all this is just to give you an idea of my perspective on the MCU and where I am at with it, because I want you all to understand where I come from when I say that you should definitely see Guardians 3. Following on from Endgame, and to a lesser extent the Guardians Christmas special, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 sees the Guardians, Peter, Drax, Nebula, Mantis, Rocket and newer recruits Kraglin and Cosmo chilling at their headquarters in nowhere, sat in something of a momentary and somber peace in their corner of the galaxy, presumably just waiting for the next threat or mission to arrive. Notably missing from their lineup is Peter's love interest Gamora, who after losing her life to Thanos was brought back as an alternative version of herself, one who never experienced her friendship with the rest of the Guardians and thus never grew out of her cold personality she was introduced with in the first movie. Something Peter especially is struggling to cope with, creating a strange dynamic for the Guardians where their leader is in a constant kind of confused, dissociative and drunken grief. Out of seemingly nowhere, the group are attacked by a superpowered warrior called Adam Warlock, who severely injures Rocket while attempting to kidnap him before fleeing after receiving injuries of his own. With Rocket in severe danger of dying and the only way to save him being buried behind the walls of a mysterious corporation, the Guardians have to pull off a high-stakes heist alongside the hired connection of a now distant Gamora against a deeply sinister and terrifying corporate tyrant, the High Evolutionary, whose history with Rocket runs deep, in a journey that tests their understanding of themselves and one another before seeing them grow and develop in interesting new ways in a cathartic, emotional and rewarding conclusion to what is now, in my honest opinion, undoubtedly the best sub-franchise in the whole of the MCU, and by far their best trilogy. Now let me just put this as plainly as possible. In case it isn't already obvious, I thought Guardians 3 was great. Like, really great. Without a shadow of a doubt, for me, this is the best movie Marvel Studios have made in years. It's one of the rare entries that I expect to revisit on multiple occasions. Feels like a story that still needed to be told and not just a story that exists out of obligation of having some brand recognition commercial output, like a lot of the other titles have felt recently. It helps, of course, that these characters still had places to go, emotional arcs to fill, and journeys to take in a post-Endgame world. The last time we left the Guardians, they were still dealing with the aforementioned fallout of losing Gamora and regaining a version of her who has never known them. Which is already a compelling enough subject to explore, but Guardians 3 goes one step further and gives everybody fully realised arcs independent of that issue, both as individuals and in relation to one another, as well as explores the often hinted at but previously never fully engaged with plot of Rocket's origins, which acts as both the emotional crux of the movie as well as the catalyst for the Guardians' further development. And what an emotional centre it is. The deep dive into his origins and the fallout from the revelations it presents represents the MCU at its most emotionally moving and utterly devastating, as well as gifts us with one of the most despicable villains they have ever had in Chikudi Iwuji's High Evolutionary, a eugenics practicing space fascist seeking to manifest his vision of the ultimate utopian society, one created without what he perceives as ugliness and imperfection, and one he is willing to commit atrocity after atrocity against human, alien and animal alike in order to achieve, with little to no empathy or regard for those he hurts along the way, who he perceives to be lesser beings. The constant flip-flop between calculated cruelty and manic mad scientist-style delivery Chikudi delivers through this character successfully crafts one of the most unhinged, unpredictable and dangerous monsters this studio has ever put to screen, and makes for an incredibly loathable and yet believable and compelling villain. I hate this guy. I hate him more than any villain from any film they have ever had before. I have never rooted against someone in any Marvel movie as much as I have this one, and his inclusion raises the stakes in a far more interesting way than the traditional I am going to do a terrorism and destroy the Earth/galaxy/universe/multiverse formula that so many of their other villains fall into. Yes, the High Evolutionary is capable of committing similar acts of global-scale misery, but equally, his cruelty at the micro level hits just as hard and feels just as important. And it's the impersonal motivations for both these acts that give him such a horrid resonating coldness that makes them hit so hard. It's often very difficult to write truly evil characters, especially within the confines of the PG-13 rating, something this film really stretches, by the way. And that's because when characters are just outright evil, like legit evil with no redeemable qualities and no hint of anything close to noble motivations, they run the risk of becoming these mustache twirling, tie the damsel to the railroad tracks just for the fun of it cartoon characters. And anyone you write who's willing to be this evil needs some more grounded reasoning behind their actions or sympathetic elements to their backstory in order to not come off as laughably one-dimensional. Usually. That's why everyone remembers Thanos and Killmonger, but no one gives a crap about Malekith the Accursed, Christopher Eccleston's totally evil and totally forgettable dark elf villain from Thor 2. The High Evolutionary, though, actually manages to pull off the feat of being completely and utterly irredeemably evil without falling into the trap of being boring. In fact, he's arguably one of the most exciting villains this whole cinematic universe has ever had. A great villain means nothing without great heroes though, and I'm happy to report that the best written and most fun heroes in the MCU, shockingly, continue to be the best written and most fun heroes in the MCU. Who would have thought it? It's a testament to James Gunn's thorough understanding of these characters that even after giving them a fully realised arc of seeing these dysfunctional, broken people come together into an adoptive family in that first film, what some would say could have been a clear and natural endpoint for these characters' growth, that he continues to find interesting narrative journeys for them to go on that don't ever feel like they're just regressing and retreading the same old ground. Though the characters will often grate on each other, it never feels like their friendship and family dynamic is ever at question, like it would have been in that first entry. And by cementing the previous movie's endpoint dynamic as the sequel's starting point, it always feels like the characters are continuing to naturally grow, taking forward the lessons and relationships they've internalized with them into their next step. And that's not easy to do. A lot of the Marvel straight sequels, while many are great, tend to feel like disjointed stories that simply happen to feature the same characters. Like if you look at, say, Captain America, that dude isn't inherently all that different a person from his first appearance to his last appearance, but the Guardians are always growing up, and that makes following their journey through those changes really rewarding and allows the final payoffs of this movie to feel earned and like a natural conclusion for each of these characters. Every one of the Guardians here is as fleshed out as ever, and all of them get something interesting to do that feeds into their character. Whether that's in a fun, creative way through the fantastically choreographed and exciting action set pieces, such as seeing Mantis flip her way through a battalion of guards and using her power to emotionally manipulate each one of their actions, juxtaposed alongside Drax, who just absolutely brute force smashes his way through them, or in terms of their emotional payoff, such as Peter having to come to terms with the fact that the Gamora he works alongside and the Gamora he loved may never be the same person. Or Rocket's origins actually coming into play in a way that feels integral to the payoffs of the main plot, rather than just being an exploration of a disjointed event that doesn't really reframe our understanding of the character and his place in the present in any way, like many prequel stories often suffer from. Marvel's own Black Widow comes to mind. It's such a satisfying conclusion in every way. I feel like all of the characters end up where they need to be, while not necessarily ending where they want to be. And that's such a delicate balance to get right, but when you do strike that right, it's often far more interesting and rewarding than your standard happy ending where all the heroes get exactly what they want. Though I've no doubt at least some of these characters will come back in some capacity as the Disney machine keeps on chugging, it at least feels for now like their stories have all hit their natural and correct conclusion in a way that feels true to the characters and the journey they have been on. Unfortunately though, I will say, in focusing so much on creating rewarding narratives for our main pre-established cast, some of the new side characters do draw a little bit of a short straw in how much depth they get given. Adam Warlock is set up to be a major player in the story from the very beginning, and while his actions certainly have major consequences on the plot, his character feels a little undercooked. Which is arguably the point, as his whole setup and gimmick is that he was kind of quite literally taken out of the oven a little too early, and so isn't fully developed as a person. But even that sort of doesn't really get explored enough for me, and he ends up feeling like an afterthought included only for reasons of needing to be around to advance the plot when necessary. I just didn't find him particularly engaging, and his shtick of being a bit of a dumb child in a superhuman adult body was never engaged with enough to be interesting, only really becoming relevant in order to deliver an occasional bit of comic levity, which the film already has in abundance and more effectively elsewhere. I do think there's something really interesting that could be done with this character dynamic for sure, but this movie doesn't do it. There's also one nitpick that admittedly does really bother me, but to talk about that would be to enter spoiler territory, so if you're bothered about that, feel free to skip to this point in the video. Otherwise, keep watching. It's just a quick little point, and I'll be done. Okay, so, hear me out here, but at the end of the movie, Rocket Raccoon should have blown that prick villain's brains to Kingdom Come. Not just because he deserved it, even though, narratively speaking, he absolutely 1,000,000% did, but also because by not killing him, the film sets itself up for a confusing contradiction in its own character's ideologies. The cruelty which he and his friends suffer in these flashbacks more than justifies Rocket killing the villain, and it still being a heroic action. You can do that in stories. No one said anyone was a bad guy in Endgame for trying to kill Thanos after all. But where this decision becomes particularly baffling is when you consider the Guardians were quite happy only a couple of scenes earlier to absolutely slaughter the man's guards, who themselves were just genetically modified animals, no doubt subject to the same horrible experimentation and cruelty that Rocket was, as reflected in their grotesque visual designs that violently combine metal and organic matter. I do understand that in the immediate conflict, these creatures are potentially lethally dangerous to the Guardians. But this still feels like an incredibly weird oversight to have Rocket pull the whole "I won't kill this genocidal eugenics freak because I'm a Guardian of the Galaxy" shtick, but seemingly having all of them show no remorse at slaughtering creatures that, while a threat, were essentially weaponized victims of this same man. Especially when we spend so much time with Rocket saying and deciding to free all of the scared caged animals about to become his next experiments in a genuinely moving scene that mirrors his past experiences. It's just such an odd creative decision, and one that Rocket just straight up killing the villain would at least make more thematically consistent. I get what they're going for in having him rise above it. It's a standard heroic trope, but it's one of the only decisions in the film I found to be unsatisfying. And I felt like its inclusion raised a bunch of problems in the film's consistency with its greater themes. If you can get over those issues though, and I certainly did, this film is honestly a fantastic closing chapter to these beloved characters' stories together. And I'm happy to report it's all tied together in a package that looks amazing. CG in Marvel Studios films have been scrutinised a lot lately, with some of it coming across particularly low quality, especially for movies of this scale and budget, no doubt due to the rushed crunch culture that allegedly permeates their creations. I don't blame the artists on that one, but seemingly the team working on this entry had time to let their work really shine, as the film looks spectacular. Striking visions of a creatively stylized galaxy shine from every frame. CG characters move and perform with genuine emotion and believable texture, and the whole presentation is tied together once again with James Gunn's signature excellent direction. Direction where, may I add, his horror and trauma roots really shine through this time, giving us some surprisingly violent visuals for a PG-13 Disney superhero movie. The film never feels like it uses violence for the sake of it though, and its inclusion always feels like a necessary elevation to the material, giving us an at times gory thrill ride, and at other moments using grotesque imagery to further cement the lack of limits of its villain's relentless cruelty. It's the kind of film that reminds you just how exciting and fresh the MCU can be when it doesn't feel like a cynical product of itself. A reminder of why these characters were so engaging and beloved enough to begin with that a whole cinematic universe could be built around their pre-existing fiction. A reminder of why people would get excited to hear their favourite comic character was being introduced into these adaptations. Is there setup for other stuff in there? I'm sure there probably is, but it's so much not the focus that you can watch it as entirely standalone and just get wrapped up in these characters and this story for a couple of hours and still have a rewarding experience. This, for me, is the kind of thing I used to get excited about with these films. It's not some Easter egg riddled advertisement for the next Easter egg riddled advertisement. It's not some hugely complex connected puzzle piece that's a stepping stone in a bigger story. It's not some multimedia project that has been created specifically with the goal of launching some spin-off television show. It's just a damn good story about damn good characters told in a way that they damn well deserve. And I think that's worth celebrating. And that is a wrap from me for today. What did you think of Guardians 3? And what did you think of this new video format? It's not necessarily something I'd stick with. I just had my camera all left out and set up from recording some Patreon stuff, and I figured I might try something different for this one. How do you all feel about it? Would you like more of this direct-to-camera stuff? Is this better? Is it worse? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, remember to help me out by liking it and subscribing to my Only Dance by hitting that red button below. And if you'd really like to support what I do here, I also have a premium Only Dance in the form of a Patreon account, which if you support me on there, you'll now get access to my most recent Patreon exclusive video, which is a whopping 50-minute long deep dive pitch, another new Patreon exclusive video going up as soon as tomorrow, Discord access, and a whole bunch of other good stuff already on there. Also, just before I go, it is a while away yet, but please make sure you do subscribe and keep an eye on this channel, as, if all goes to plan, I'm intending to do another big project again this year. Just in case things go wrong, I can't say anything more than that. So I realise this is the teeniest of teeny teasers, but just watch out for that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. This vid, I'd like to give a special shout out to my patrons Bearded Axe Models, Ariel Griffiths, and the Lovebirds, as well as thank every one of the names about to come up on screen right now.